High Counselor Sixta of the Arcturian Alliance stood before the Emergency Galactic Council, their crystalline form dulled with exhaustion and fear. The Nano-Plague had already claimed 3 billion lives across their 17 colonies. Their best scientists were either dead or dying. Their medical facilities were overwhelmed. And now, watching the holographic representatives of 26 spacefaring civilizations slowly fade away one by one, Sixta felt the last remnants of hope crumbling. "We cannot risk exposure," the Centaurian representative had said. "The potential for cross-species contamination is too high," the Rigelians explained. "Your situation is regrettable, but intervention would violate our non-interference protocols," the Vegan Confederacy declared. Only one hologram remained, the newest species to join the Galactic Council: humans, the Deathworlders. The ones who had emerged from their gravity well of a planet with bodies built to endure punishment that would kill most species. The ones who still carried ancient biological defensive systems like fever and inflammation. Systems other species had engineered away millennia ago. Ambassador Elena Rodriguez's hologram stood firm, her dark eyes focused intently on Sixta. "High Counselor, could you repeat the estimated rate of spread?" "The Nano-Plague doubles its reach every 26 hours, Sixta replied, their voice crackling with static interference, a sign of extreme distress in their species. "At current progression, all major population centers will be infected within 15 days. Rodriguez nodded, her fingers dancing across an unseen interface. "And your atmospheric composition?" "Nitrogen-methane blend, pressure at 0.8 Earth standard." "Ambassador, why?" "Because we're coming," Rodriguez interrupted. "All of us." Sixta's crystalline form flickered in confusion. "I don't understand." "The Third Human Medical Fleet is already mobilizing. 47 hospital ships, 12 research vessels, 8 mobile containment facilities, and their military escorts. We've also activated our civilian emergency response network. There are already 6,000 volunteer medical professionals preparing for deployment." "But the risk of contamination?" Rodriguez's hologram smiled. It wasn't the diplomatic smile Sixta had grown accustomed to seeing in council meetings. This was something else, something that reminded them that humans had evolved as pursuit predators. "High Counselor, do you know why we still have immune systems? Why we kept our ability to fight disease instead of engineering it away like most species?" She didn't wait for an answer. "Because somewhere deep in our collective memory, we remember what it's like to watch plagues destroy everything we love. We remember standing helpless as death swept through our cities. And we swore, never again. Not to us, and not to anyone else." Alerts began flashing across Sixta's neural interface. Hundreds of ships were appearing at the edge of Arcturian space, far more than the numbers Rodriguez had quoted. The ambassador noticed their confusion. "Oh, those extra ships. Those are the civilian volunteers. We put out a call for anyone with a ship capable of atmospheric entry and basic medical facilities. Turns out humans don't like sitting idle when someone needs help." "But your people could die," Sixta protested. "This plague, it adapts, it learns." "So do we," Rodriguez replied firmly. "It's what humans do best. We adapt, we overcome, and we help others do the same. Now, our advanced teams will arrive in approximately 40 minutes. I suggest you prepare your medical facilities to receive them." As the hologram faded, Sixta stood motionless, watching the steady stream of human ships appearing on their sensors. Their entire civilization had been resigned to extinction mere hours ago. Now their space was filling with vessels crewed by beings from a death world, beings who had looked at a lethal nano-plague and decided to fight it with nothing but determination and their notorious immune systems. "Update from Human Medical Fleet," their assistant announced. "They're requesting atmospheric composition data for all affected colonies and current infection vectors. They're also asking if we have any dietary restrictions for the medical support staff they're bringing. Additionally, it seems they're broadcasting something on all frequencies." "What are they broadcasting?" Music, High Counselor. Something called Another One Bites the Dust. They say it's traditional human medical battle hymn. For the first time since the plague began, Sixta felt their crystalline form vibrate with something close to hope. The Deathworlders were coming, and they were bringing their mysterious immune systems, their adaptability, and their inexplicable habit of turning everything, even plague fighting, into a battle with its own soundtrack. Perhaps their species would survive after all. Dr. Sarah Chen stood in the containment bay of the HMHS Nightingale, watching her team suit up for deployment. The massive hospital ship, nearly the size of a small city, hummed with activity as final preparations were made. Through the observation window, the crystalline spires of the Arcturian capital glittered beneath them, beautiful even in crisis. Final atmospheric analysis confirmed, her AI assistant reported. Nitrogen-methane mix is within tolerable limits for sealed operations. Warning: crystalline particulate levels may interfere with standard sensor equipment. Sarah nodded, checking the seals on her own biocontainment suit. It wasn't the bulky, rigid thing most would expect. Human engineering had produced a suit that looked almost like a second skin, its smart fabric constantly adapting and self-repairing. "What's the status on the nanoplague samples?" she asked, watching as her team of 50 prepared their mobile medical units. "Initial analysis is troubling, Doctor. The plague appears to be targeting crystalline matrices at their atomic level. For the Arcturians, whose bodies are essentially living crystals, it's catastrophic." A loud crash interrupted them as Private Joey Martinez, one of their military escorts, practically kicked down the door to the containment bay. "Doc, you need to see this." Sarah followed him to the ship's main observation deck. What she saw made her breath catch. Hundreds of civilian ships were entering the atmosphere alongside the official medical fleet. Everything from retired ambulance ships to converted cargo haulers, all painted with the universal medical symbol and trailing sterilization fields behind them. "They just keep coming," Martine said, grinning. Apparently every retired medic, nurse, and doctor with access to a ship decided to show up. There's even a group of veterinarians from Alpha Centauri who specialize in crystalline life forms. Before Sarah could respond, her comm crackled. "Dr. Chen, it was High Counselor Sixta. We're receiving thousands of landing requests. Our ports can't handle this volume of traffic." "Then we'll make new ports," Sarah replied, already pulling up city schematics on her neural interface. "Martinez, get me engineering. Tell them to deploy the rapid construction units. We're going to build landing pads right next to the hospitals. But our infrastructure," Sixta began, "will adapt, just like we will." Sarah's fingers flew across holographic displays as she coordinated with other ships. "Counselor, humanity has been dealing with plagues since before we invented writing. Trust me, we've gotten very good at this." Over the next hour, Sarah watched as human ingenuity transformed the Arcturian capital. Prefabricated landing pads sprouted like steel flowers around medical centers. Mobile containment units deployed massive sterilization fields. Civilian ships landed in newly designated zones, disgorging medical teams and equipment. But it was when they entered the main hospital that the true horror of the nanoplague became apparent. The Arcturians, their crystalline bodies normally prismatic and vibrant, lay in rows, their forms clouded and cracking. The nanoplague was literally breaking them apart at a molecular level. "Jesus," Martins whispered, his hand tightening on his medical scanner. "How do we fight something like this?" Sarah watched as her team immediately spread out, setting up equipment and beginning triage. She saw determination in every movement, heard it in every crisp order given. These were humans at their finest, facing impossible odds with nothing but skill, science, and sheer stubborn will. "The same way humanity has always fought things that were supposed to be unbeatable," she replied. "We adapt, we improvise, and we absolutely refuse to give up." She activated her neural interface, connecting to the massive medical network that was forming as more ships arrived. Thousands of human medical professionals, all sharing data, theories, and observations in real time. Already, patterns were emerging. Solutions were being proposed and tested. "Doctor," one of her assistants called out, "we're seeing something strange in the infection patterns. The plague seems to be avoiding areas with high electromagnetic activity." Sarah's eyes widened. "Get me the ship's quantum computing lab. And find out if any of our civilian volunteers brought mining equipment. I have an idea." "Mining equipment?" Martines asked, confused. "The Arcturians are crystalline life forms," Sarah explained, already moving toward the hospital's research wing. "Their bodies operate on principles similar to piezoelectric crystals. If we can generate the right electromagnetic frequency." She paused, watching as another wave of human ships entered the atmosphere. Each one represented people who had dropped everything to help a species they'd barely met. People who looked at a lethal monoplague and saw a challenge rather than a death sentence. "Martinez," she said, "get me every electromagnetic generator you can find. We're about to try something either brilliant or insane." "With respect, Doc," he replied with a grin. "With humans, isn't it usually both?" Sarah couldn't help but smile as she watched her team's work. The Arcturians had called for help, expecting at most a small medical team. Instead, they got humanity in all its chaotic, determined glory. And as she began calibrating equipment for her electromagnetic theory, she silently promised them what every human medical professional had been promising patients for millennia. "We will not let you die." The makeshift command center aboard the Nightingale buzzed with activity as Dr. Chen stared at the holographic display showing infection patterns across the Arcturian colonies. Red zones of infection pulsed and spread like deadly constellations, but now there were spots of blue, areas where the electromagnetic treatment was working. "The plague is adapting," Dr. Raj Patil announced, his hologram flickering beside her. He was coordinating efforts from the research vessel Einstein, where they'd converted the entire ship into a massive testing facility. "It's developing resistance to the EM frequencies." Sarah ran her fingers through her hair, a habit from her residency days. "How long?" "At current mutation rates, 48 hours before our current treatment becomes ineffective." Before Sarah could respond, alarms blared throughout the ship. Martinez burst into the command center, his face pale. "Doc, we've got a problem. The plague. It's jumped species." The room fell silent. Sarah's blood ran cold. "Show me." The main display shifted to show medical readings from one of the civilian ships. A Rigelian medical observer, one of the few non-human aliens who'd stayed to document the human response, was showing early signs of infection. Their crystalline components, though minimal compared to Arcturians, were being attacked by the nanoplague. "It's evolving," Sarah whispered, learning to target different crystalline structures. She activated the general comm channel. "This is Dr. Chen. All non-human personnel are to evacuate immediately. This is not a request." "Begging your pardon, Doctor," a gravelly voice interrupted. It was Captain Helena Wong of the civilian ship Star's Mercy, a converted mining vessel. "But we might have something." "Been working with some of the other mining crews on an idea." Sarah's neural interface lit up with incoming data. The mining crews had been experimenting with their sonic drilling equipment, modifying it to generate specific vibrational frequencies. "The plague adapts to EM fields," Wong explained. "But what about good old-fashioned mechanical disruption? Every crystal has a resonant frequency. Hit it right. And the plague's crystalline structure could be shattered." Sarah finished, her mind racing, "without damaging the Arcturian's natural crystalline matrix." "Exactly. We've got 50 mining ships with modified sonic equipment ready to go. Just say the word." Sarah turned to Martinez. "Get me High Counselor Zixta. And tell every ship with mining equipment to start modifying their gear. We're about to try something unprecedented." Hours later, Sarah stood in the capital's central plaza, watching as mining ships hovered in formation above the city. The remaining Arcturians had been evacuated to shielded zones, and the air thrummed with anticipation. You understand the risks? She asked Zixta, who had insisted on staying to observe. If our calculations are off by even a fraction. Doctor, the High Counselor's crystalline form shimmered with what Sarah had learned was their version of a smile. In the past week, I've watched humans build hospitals in hours, develop treatments for what we thought was untreatable, and turn mining equipment into medical devices. If anyone can do this, it's your species. Sarah nodded and activated her comm. All ships, commence Operation Crystal Song on my mark. She took a deep breath. 3, 2, 1, mark. The air itself seemed to vibrate as 50 mining ships activated their modified sonic equipment simultaneously. The frequency, carefully calculated to target the plague's crystalline structure while leaving Arcturian biology intact, was beyond human hearing, but they could feel it in their bones. Through her neural interface, Sarah watched as plague indicators across the city began to change. The nanomachines were literally shaking apart, their complex crystalline structures shattering under the precise frequency assault. It's working, Martins breathed, staring at his scanner. Holy shit, it's actually working. But victory celebrations were premature. New alarms blared across the medical network. The plague was adapting again, faster than before. Crystalline structures were reorganizing, trying to stabilize against the sonic assault. All ships increase power by 20%. Sarah ordered, "Don't let up." The vibrations intensified. Equipment groaned under the strain. Several mining ships reported overheating engines. "Doctor," Zixta said urgently, "our buildings." Sarah saw it too. The sonic assault was affecting more than just the plague. The city's crystalline architecture was beginning to resonate dangerously. "We can't stop," she said grimly. "If we stop now, the plague adapts and becomes immune to this treatment too." She keyed her comm again. "This is Dr. Chen to all ships. Push your equipment to maximum power. Burn out your engines if you have to, but give me everything you've got for the next 60 seconds. The city won't survive that level of resonance," Zixta warned. Sarah met their gaze steadily. "Which would you rather save? Your people or your buildings?" The High Counselor's form pulsed once, then they activated their own communication system. "Attention all Arcturians. Brace for structural damage. Let them save us." The next minute was chaos. The sonic assault reached levels that made human teeth rattle in their skulls. Crystalline buildings cracked and shattered. Mining ships' engines screamed in protest. But when it was over, when the dust settled, and the readings came in, Sarah allowed herself to smile. The plague indicators were gone. Not reduced, not suppressed. Gone. Preliminary scans show complete elimination of nanoplague structures, the Einstein reported. Repeat. Complete elimination. It worked. Around them, the Arcturian capital lay in partial ruins. But its people were saved. And as Sarah watched humans and Arcturians emerging from shelter, she saw something she'd seen countless times in human history. The aftermath of choosing survival over preservation, of sacrificing the replaceable to save the irreplaceable. "Your city," she said to Zixta. "I'm sorry." The High Counselor's crystalline form glowed brighter than she'd ever seen it. "Dr. Chen, you humans have a saying we've learned recently. You can't make an omelet without breaking some eggs. We can rebuild our cities. Thanks to humanity's refusal to give up, we're alive to do so." The mood aboard the Nightingale's primary research lab was tense as Dr. Chen stared at the quantum analysis results. Behind her, Dr. Patel's hologram flickered anxiously, while Captain Wong and Martinez waited in silence. What they'd discovered in the plague's base code was worse than anyone had imagined. "This wasn't natural," Sarah finally said, her voice tight. "The plague was engineered. And if these markers are correct," she closed her eyes briefly, "it came from Earth." The silence that followed was deafening. Martinez was the first to break it. "That's impossible. All bioweapon research was banned after the Third World War." "Official research, yes," Raj's hologram nodded grimly. But look at these signature sequences. They match experimental medical nanites developed at the Singapore Advanced Medical Research Facility 20 years ago. The project was supposedly scrapped. Supposedly, Sarah repeated bitterly. She brought up a complex molecular diagram. Someone continued the research in secret. They were trying to create adaptive medical nanites that could repair crystalline structures. But something went wrong. The nanites were programmed to identify and modify crystalline patterns, but without proper containment protocols. They became a plague that attacks crystalline life forms. Wong finished. But how did it get here? The Arcturian systems are hundreds of light years from Earth. Before Sarah could respond, her neural interface pinged with an urgent message. High Counselor Zixta's hologram appeared in the lab, their crystalline form clouded with distress. Dr. Chen, we're detecting new plague formations in the outer colonies. The sonic treatment. Some of the nanites survived. They're evolving faster than before, becoming resistant to all our previous treatments. Sarah's mind raced. The plague wasn't just adapting anymore. It was learning, evolving at an exponential rate. Soon, no frequency combination would be able to stop it. Unless the Singapore facility, she said suddenly. They must have developed countermeasures, fail-safes. If we can access their research. Already tried. Raj interrupted. The facility's quantum locked. Even with emergency authorization, it would take weeks to safely decrypt their systems. Then we don't decrypt them. Sarah's voice was steel. We destroy them. A focused quantum pulse would wipe their systems and trigger any fail-safe protocols, including emergency countermeasure broadcasts. That's the most advanced medical research facility on Earth. Martins protested. Decades of research, potential cures for dozens of diseases. All of which means nothing if this plague spreads. Sarah cut him off. It's already jumping to other crystalline-based life forms. How long before it learns to affect carbon-based life? We're not just fighting for the Arcturians anymore. The room fell silent again as the implications sank in. Destroying the facility would set human medical research back by decades. But if they didn't, Sarah's neural interface lit up with new data. The plague's spread in the outer colonies was accelerating. They had hours, not days. High Counselor, she addressed Zixta's hologram. I need you to understand what we're about to do. We're going to sacrifice humanity's most advanced medical research to save your people. The cost to human medical progress will be substantial. The Arcturian leader's form pulsed with emotion. Why? After everything your people have done, why would you sacrifice even more? Because that's what humanity does, Sarah replied simply. When we commit to helping, we commit completely, even when it costs us everything. She turned to her team. Raj, get me a quantum link to the facility. Captain Wong, I need your mining ships ready to generate an ion shield around the target area. This is going to get messy. Martinez, already coordinating with Earth Defense Forces, he nodded. They'll clear the area. The next hour was a blur of preparation. Sarah worked with Raj to set up the quantum pulse, while Wong's mining fleet positioned themselves around the Singapore facility. Earth's authorities, upon learning of the plague's origin, gave immediate authorization for the facility's destruction. Pulse charged to maximum, Raj reported. Ready on your mark. Sarah took a deep breath, her finger hovering over the activation command. Years of medical research, potential cures for countless diseases, all about to be destroyed. High Counselor, is the plague still spreading in your colonies? Yes, Zixta replied. But Dr. Chen, are you certain? The cost is worth it. Sarah pressed the command. Executing quantum pulse now. The Singapore facility didn't explode, it imploded. The quantum pulse collapsed the building's structure while simultaneously wiping its data systems. And just as Sarah had hoped, the destruction triggered emergency protocols. Fail-safe signals burst from the facility's quantum core, broadcasting countermeasure codes across space. In the Arcturian colonies, The effect was immediate. The plague nanites, responding to their original programming, began to break down. "It's working," Zixta announced, their form brightening. "The plague, it's dissolving." All colonies reporting rapid deterioration of nanostructures. Sarah slumped in her chair, suddenly exhausted. On her neural interface, reports were already coming in about the facility's destruction. The medical community was in an uproar. Decades of research, gone in an instant. "Doc," Martinez said softly, "you did the right thing." "Did I?" she asked, watching the facility's last remaining data streams fade to nothing. "We just set human medical science back by 50 years. "No," Zixta's hologram interrupted. "You showed us what human medical science truly is. It's not about facilities or data. It's about the willingness to sacrifice everything to save others. You've taught us that medicine isn't just about preserving life. It's about preserving what makes life worth living." 1 year after the Nanoplague crisis, the Galactic Council chamber looked vastly different from the day when a desperate Arcturian had begged for help. The crystalline architecture now incorporated distinct human design elements, stronger, more resilient, yet still beautiful. But the biggest change was in the attitudes of the assembled species. High Counselor Zixta stood before them, their crystalline form radiant with health. Addressing the full council for the first time since the crisis, behind them stood Dr. Sarah Chen, Captain Wang, Martinez, now Major, and Dr. Patel, the key figures in what historians were already calling the Great Plague War. 1 year ago, Zixta began. "Our civilization faced extinction. We called for help, and only one species answered: the humans, the Deathworlders. The ones many of you feared would bring violence to our galaxy." Their form pulsed with emotion. Instead, they brought salvation. Holoprojections appeared around the chamber, showing scenes from the crisis. Human ships arriving in endless waves, makeshift hospitals rising from nothing, medical teams working tirelessly alongside mining crews turned plague fighters. "But it wasn't just what they did that changed us," Zixta continued. "It was how they did it. When conventional methods failed, they adapted. When the plague evolved, they evolved faster. When faced with losing their most advanced medical facility, or saving our people, they chose us without hesitation." Sarah shifted uncomfortably at the mention of the Singapore facility. The past year had been challenging for human medical science, but something unexpected had emerged from that sacrifice. The Arcturians, in gratitude, had opened their own vast medical database to humanity. The exchange of knowledge between crystalline and carbon-based medical science was yielding breakthroughs neither species could have achieved alone. "We called them Deathworlders," Zixta said, their voice carrying across the chamber. "We meant it as a term of fear, of otherness. But we understand now what that term truly means. It means they come from a world that tried to kill them countless times, and each time, they didn't just survive. They learned. They adapted. They grew stronger." The High Counselor's form brightened. And most importantly, they chose to use that strength not for conquest, not for dominance, but for healing, for helping, even at great cost to themselves. Sarah watched as the other council members stirred uncomfortably. The Centaurians, the Regelians, the Vegan Confederacy, all those who had turned their backs during the crisis were now forced to confront the consequences of their choices. Therefore, Zixta announced, the Arcturian Alliance proposes a new initiative. We wish to establish the first joint medical response force, combining human adaptability with our crystalline technology. A force dedicated to responding to medical crises throughout the galaxy, regardless of species, regardless of risk. The chamber erupted in murmurs. Sarah felt a smile tugging at her lips as she watched the reactions. Already, she could see some representatives leaning forward with interest. Furthermore, Zixta continued, we move to officially redesignate the term Deathworlder in all galactic records. From this day forward, it shall be recorded as a term of honor, denoting a species that has mastered death itself not to deal it out, but to fight it, to heal, To save. The voting was almost unanimous. As the new initiative was formally approved, Sarah felt Martinez nudge her shoulder. "Think we should tell them about the volunteer lists," he whispered. Sarah grinned. In the past month alone, over 50,000 humans had signed up to join the new Joint Medical Response Force. Retired doctors, fresh medical graduates, experienced nurses, and even more mining crews eager to help. The human drive to heal, to help, to fight death itself hadn't diminished. If anything, the plague crisis had strengthened it. "Let them find out the same way the Arcturians did," she whispered back, "when they call for help and the sky fills with ships." After the session, as they prepared to return to their ships, Sixta approached them privately. "Dr. Chen," they said, "my people have a saying now, coined during the crisis. When death comes, call the Deathworlders. Some think it's ironic. We know it's simply true." Sarah looked out at the galactic core shining through the council chamber's windows. Somewhere out there, another crisis was probably brewing. Another species might soon find themselves facing extinction, but now they wouldn't face it alone. "You know what humans say about death, counselor," she replied. "Death may be inevitable, but the timing is negotiable, and we're very, very good at negotiating." As if to emphasize her point, alerts began flashing across her neural interface. A distress call from a distant system. A new pathogen. A desperate plea for help. Sarah smiled as she saw human ships already plotting courses, medical teams already preparing. The Deathworlders were about to show the galaxy once again what that term really meant. Because that's what humans do. We run toward the disaster. We fight the unbeatable. We save lives, no matter the cost. We are the Deathworlders. And we're coming to help.